The marketplace buzzed with life as traders from across the galaxy bartered and haggled, their voices blending into a chaotic symphony. Every corner of the space station seemed alive, bustling with beings from distant stars. Lyra moved carefully through the crowd, her hood pulled low over her face, concealing her distinctive silver skin. She had learned long ago that being noticed meant trouble. For as long as she could remember, her kind, the Nalvrin, were branded as cursed. Stories passed down through generations claimed that their shimmering skin brought disaster. No one cared to understand or question these tales. Fear was a powerful force. Lyra had grown up hearing whispers about her people, stories that painted them as harbingers of doom. To survive, she hid. Her worn cloak fluttered slightly as she moved, brushing against her ankles. The fabric was thick, chosen specifically to hide any glint of her true self. Lyra felt the weight of every gaze, though most were fleeting and uninterested. The less attention she drew, the safer she felt. She approached a vendor selling a variety of dried fruits, her eyes scanning the selection quickly. The old merchant barely looked up as she handed over a few credits and received a small package in return. It was a simple transaction, one that should have ended without incident. But just as she turned to leave, a voice called out behind her. "You dropped this," a man's voice said. Lyra froze for a moment, her heart racing. Slowly, she turned to see a human holding a small data chip. His face was open and friendly, with curious blue eyes and a slight smile that didn't match the usual wary expressions she was used to seeing. He extended the chip toward her. "Must have slipped out of your bag," he said casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Lyra hesitated, her instinct screaming at her to run, to avoid any unnecessary interaction. But she couldn't just leave the chip. It contained valuable information she couldn't afford to lose. With a quick glance around to ensure no one else was watching, she stepped forward and took the chip from its hand. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded, not pressing her for more. "No problem. Name's Ethan, by the way. You're new around here, right?" Lyra gave a slight nod but didn't offer her name. Ethan didn't seem offended by her silence. Instead, he simply smiled again and gave a small wave before walking away, blending back into the crowd. Lyra watched him for a moment longer before slipping the data chip into her bag and disappearing into the maze of stalls. Back in her small rented room, Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She locked the door behind her and pulled down her hood, revealing her luminous silver skin. The light from the ceiling glinted off it, casting a soft glow around the room. She stared at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror, the weight of the day pressing down on her. She had been so careful, so vigilant. Yet a single interaction had reminded her how precarious her situation was. Trusting anyone was a risk she couldn't afford, especially not here, in a place where myths and superstitions held sway over logic and reason. Still, there was something about Ethan's eyes, the way he looked at her without fear or suspicion. It was different from the others she had encountered, but different didn't mean safe. Lyra knew better than to let her guard down. The next day, she went about her usual routine, keeping to the shadows and avoiding unnecessary attention. Yet, as much as she tried to blend in, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't paranoia. Years of living in hiding had sharpened her instincts. She kept her movements deliberate, pretending not to notice. As the day wore on, she caught sight of Ethan again, working on a ship at the edge of the docking bay. He didn't see her, engrossed in his task, wiping sweat from his brow as he adjusted some wiring. For a moment, Lyra considered approaching him, asking why he had helped her, why he didn't treat her like everyone else. But the thought quickly vanished. She couldn't afford to let curiosity dictate her actions. Her survival depended on staying invisible, on being nothing more than a shadow passing through. And yet, the encounter lingered in her mind, a small spark of something she couldn't quite define. As the station lights dimmed for the artificial night cycle, Lyra lay on the narrow cot in her room, staring at the ceiling. The stars outside the small window blinked back at her, distant and indifferent. She had always been alone, always moving, always hiding. It was the only life she knew. But for the first time in a long while, she found herself wondering if there could be more. If perhaps somewhere out there, someone might see beyond the myths, beyond the fear, and understand the truth of who she was. For now, though, Lyra remained cautious. The universe was vast and unforgiving, and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Yet, deep down, she held onto a small glimmer of hope, one that refused to be extinguished. The station's artificial morning came with a gentle hum, the lights gradually brightening to simulate the start of a new day. Lyra pulled her hood over her head before stepping out of her room, blending into the stream of people moving about the station. She kept her pace steady, her eyes downcast, as she navigated through the crowd toward the quieter docks. She had a routine, one that kept her hidden and safe. Yet today, something felt different. The memory of Ethan's friendly face from the day before lingered in her mind, a strange curiosity about him stirring within her. Despite her better judgment, she found herself walking toward the shipyard, where she had seen him working. The shipyard was a bustling place, filled with the sounds of tools clanging, engines humming, and conversations between mechanics and pilots. Lyra stayed in the shadows, her eyes scanning the area until she spotted Ethan. He was leaning against a large cargo ship, wiping his hands on a rag, his face relaxed and thoughtful as he gazed at the expanse of stars visible through the station's dome. Lyra watched him from a distance, unsure why she hadn't just turned and left. Something about his demeanor was different from anyone else she had encountered. There was a kindness in his expression, a genuine ease that was rare in a galaxy filled with suspicion and fear. She couldn't help but wonder what had made him that way. Before she could decide whether to approach him or leave, Ethan turned his head and caught sight of her. For a moment, they locked eyes, and Lyra felt a wave of panic rising. But Ethan simply smiled, lifting a hand in a casual wave, as if greeting an old friend. Caught off guard, Lyra hesitated, her instincts battling with her curiosity. Finally, she took a cautious step forward, her heart pounding as she closed the distance between them. Ethan watched her approach, his smile never wavering. "Hey there," he said warmly. "I was hoping I'd see you again." Lyra stopped a few feet away, her eyes flickering around to ensure no one else was paying attention. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Ethan shrugged, tossing the rag onto a nearby toolbox. "I don't know. You seemed interesting, different from most folks around here." Different. The word echoed in Lyra's mind. She had spent her entire life trying not to be different, to blend in and go unnoticed. Yet Ethan had noticed her, and not in the way others usually did. "You don't even know me," she said, her voice tinged with suspicion. "No," Ethan admitted, leaning back against the ship. "But I'd like to, if you'll let me." Lyra studied him, searching for any signs of deceit or ulterior motives, but found none. Ethan's eyes held only curiosity and an openness that made her feel uneasy, but also intrigued. She had spent so long running and hiding that the idea of someone wanting to know her for who she truly was felt foreign and dangerous. "I'm not like you," she said cautiously. Ethan nodded. "I figured, but that's okay. We don't have to be the same to understand each other, right?" His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made Lyra pause. She had always believed that her differences set her apart in ways that could never be bridged. But Ethan's perspective was different, and it made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more than isolation. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Lyra hesitated again. Sharing her name felt like giving away a piece of herself, a risk she wasn't sure she could take. But something in Ethan's gaze made her want to trust, if only a little. "Lyra," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's smile widened. "Nice to meet you, Lyra." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the shipyard around them fading into the background. For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a sliver of connection, a fragile thread that tied her to another being in a way she hadn't allowed before. Ethan didn't push for more. He seemed content to simply share the moment, to let Lyra take the lead if she wanted to. And though part of her screamed to walk away, to retreat into the safety of solitude, another part urged her to stay, to see where this path might lead. "Why do you care?" she asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could stop it. Ethan tilted his head, considering her words. "I guess I've always been curious about things people fear without understanding. Maybe it's just my nature to want to know more, to see beyond what's on the surface." Lyra nodded slowly, processing his words. They were simple, yet they spoke to a part of her that longed to be understood, to be seen for more than the myths that surrounded her kind. "I should go," she said, though her feet didn't move. "Sure," Ethan said gently, not pressing her to stay. "But if you ever want to talk or need help with anything, I'm usually around here." Lyra gave a small nod before turning to leave, her heart still racing. As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter had shifted something within her, something she couldn't yet name. And for the first time in a long while, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a place for her in this vast, uncertain universe. The following day, the station's usual hum was overshadowed by an undercurrent of tension that Lyra could feel in the air. It wasn't uncommon for minor disputes to arise among the diverse population of traders, travelers, and settlers, but today felt different. Whispers and hurried conversations filled the corridors, and Lyra, keeping her hood low, tried to move unnoticed through the throng of people. She had intended to avoid the docks, hoping to slip into the market quickly and return to her room. But curiosity, that persistent tug, drew her back toward the shipyard where she had met Ethan. The quiet kindness he had shown still lingered in her thoughts, and though she knew better than to seek him out, she couldn't help but be drawn to his presence. As she neared the shipyard, she noticed a crowd gathering near one of the larger cargo ships. The voices were raised, filled with fear and anger. Lyra's heart sank as she realized they were looking in her direction. No, not at her, but at something on the ground near the dock. Pushing through the crowd cautiously, she saw what had caught their attention. A small broken device that emitted a faint, irregular pulse of light. It was a Nalvaran artifact, ancient and rare, and its presence here could only mean one thing. Someone had discovered what she was. "Who brought this here?" a man's voice demanded from the front of the crowd. He was tall, with a commanding presence that silenced the murmurs around him. "Everyone knows what these things mean. They'd bring bad luck, misfortune, death." The crowd shifted uneasily, the fear in their eyes growing. Lyra felt her breath catch in her throat. She had been careful, meticulous even. How could this have happened? "I found it," another voice said, quieter but firm. Lyra recognized it instantly. Ethan stepped forward, holding the crowd's attention. "But it's not what you think." The man who had spoken earlier scowled. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, human. That artifact is cursed, just like the ones who made it. If it's here, one of them is too. We need to find them and get them off this station before it's too late." Lyra's pulse quickened. Her mind raced with options. Run, hide, find another place to disappear into. But Ethan's calm voice cut through the rising panic. Or, Ethan said, "We could take a step back and think about this logically. Maybe it's just an old piece of tech. Maybe there's more to the story than the myths you've heard." The crowd murmured, some agreeing with Ethan's suggestion, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The man's eyes narrowed, suspicion etched into his face. "And what would you know about it?" "I know that fear makes people do stupid things," Ethan replied. "And I know that blaming someone for things we don't understand only leads to more problems." The tension in the air thickened, but Ethan didn't waver. Lyra felt a strange mix of emotions, fear for her safety, but also a flicker of hope. Ethan was standing up for reason, for the possibility that the myths were wrong. But how long could he hold the crowd at bay? Then someone from the back of the crowd yelled, He's defending them. He must know where the cursed one is. The accusation spread like wildfire, the crowd turning their suspicion toward Ethan. Lyra knew she couldn't let this escalate further. Her presence was already a danger to him, and if the crowd's anger turned physical, Ethan could be hurt, or worse. Before she could think it through, Lyra stepped forward, lowering her hood to reveal her shimmering silver skin. Gasps echoed through the crowd as they recoiled in fear and shock. "I'm the one you're looking for," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the fear knotting her stomach. "But I'm not cursed. None of my kind are. The stories you've heard are lies, spread to keep us isolated and afraid." The crowd was stunned into silence, their eyes wide as they took in the sight of her. The shimmering skin they had been taught to fear was now before them, and for a moment, their fear clashed with curiosity. Ethan moved to her side, his presence a calming force. "See, she's not some monster. She's just another traveler, like the rest of us. Maybe it's time we start questioning those old stories." The man at the front sneered, unwilling to let go of his deeply ingrained beliefs. "You expect us to believe that, after all the disasters that have followed their kind?" Lyra stepped forward, meeting his gaze with a steady determination. "Tell me, have you ever seen a Nalvern bring disaster with your own eyes? Or have you only heard the stories?" The man hesitated, and that was all the opening Ethan needed. "Exactly. Maybe it's time to stop living in fear of things we've never understood." Slowly, the crowd began to disperse, their fear giving way to uncertainty. Some still cast wary glances at Lyra, but others seemed to be rethinking their beliefs. The man grumbled but turned and walked away, leaving Ethan and Lyra standing together. As the last of the crowd disappeared, Lyra looked at Ethan, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan smiled gently. "It's what friends do." Lyra's heart swelled at his words. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. The tension from the previous day still hung in the air, but the station had begun to settle. The crowd that had once eyed Lyra with fear and suspicion now seemed more subdued, their curiosity tempered by uncertainty. Whispers still followed her, but the open hostility had faded, at least for the moment. Ethan and Lyra walked through the quieter corridors of the station, their steps echoing softly against the metallic walls. They needed answers, something concrete to dispel the myths that had plagued the Nalvern for centuries. Lyra's revelation had been a bold move, but it wouldn't be enough to change minds permanently. They needed proof, a way to show the truth. "We have to find out where these stories started," Ethan said, breaking the silence as they entered the small, dimly lit room he used as his workspace. "There has to be some record, something that explains why your people were branded as cursed." Lyra nodded, her silver skin glinting faintly in the low light. "There are old stories among my people," she said. "They talk about a time when we were revered, not feared. But the details were lost over generations, buried under the weight of superstition." Ethan leaned against the workbench, arms crossed as he considered their next steps. There has to be a way to trace it back. Maybe ancient records, or someone who knows the old histories. Lyra thought for a moment, her mind sifting through fragments of stories she had heard as a child. "There's a planet," she said slowly, "a desolate place where the ruins of an ancient Nalvern civilization still stand. It's said that the oldest truths are hidden there, waiting to be uncovered." Ethan's eyes lit up with determination. "Then that's where we need to go." Lyra hesitated. "It's a dangerous journey. The planet is remote, and the conditions are harsh. That's why few have dared to go there." Ethan gave her a reassuring smile. "We've already faced danger here. A little more won't stop us. If there's a chance we can find the truth and change how people see your kind, it's worth it." Lyra felt a surge of hope at Ethan's words. For the first time, she wasn't facing this alone. Together, they could challenge the lies that had defined her life and perhaps find a new path forward. With a plan in place, they set off the next morning in a small ship Ethan had managed to borrow from a friend. The journey would take several days, giving them time to prepare and reflect. As the stars streaked past the ship's windows, Lyra found herself opening up more to Ethan, sharing stories of her people, their culture, and the deep connection they once had with the cosmos. Ethan listened intently, absorbing every detail. "It's incredible," he said after one such story. "Your people sound remarkable. It's hard to believe they were reduced to mere myths of fear." Lyra nodded, a tinge of sadness in her eyes. Fear is a powerful tool. It can erase the truth and replace it with lies that are easier to control. Ethan reached across the narrow space between them, placing a hand on hers. "We'll uncover the truth, Lyra, together." Their journey eventually brought them to the edge of a forgotten system, where the desolate planet lay waiting. As they approached, the planet's surface came into view, an expanse of cracked earth and towering ruins, bathed in the dim light of a distant sun. The remnants of an ancient civilization stood like silent sentinels, watching over the desolation. Landing the ship near what appeared to be the heart of the ruins, Ethan and Lyra stepped out into the arid air. The wind whispered through the broken structures, carrying with it the echoes of a long-lost era. "This is it," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with reverence. "The place where it all began." They began to explore, their footsteps stirring the dust of centuries. The ruins told a story of a civilization that had once thrived, its architecture intricate and grand. But beneath the beauty lay the shadows of what had come after, the destruction, the abandonment, and the erasure of the Nalvarin's true history. In the heart of the ruins, they found a vast chamber, its walls etched with ancient symbols and murals. Lyra traced her fingers along the carvings, her eyes wide with recognition. "These tell our story," she whispered. "Before the myths, before the fear." Ethan moved beside her, studying the murals that depicted the Nalvarin not as cursed beings, but as guardians of a powerful cosmic energy. They were shown bringing balance to the galaxy, their shimmering skin a symbol of their connection to the universe's deepest forces. "This changes everything," Ethan said, awe in his voice. "Your people were protectors, not bringers of doom." Lyra nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "It's the truth we've been searching for, the truth that's been buried for so long." But as they stood there, absorbing the magnitude of their discovery, a low rumble echoed through the chamber. The ground beneath them trembled, a reminder that the journey was far from over. "We need to document this," Ethan said urgently. "The world needs to see it." Lyra agreed, determination hardening in her gaze. They would bring the truth to light, no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. Together, they would rewrite the history that had been stolen from her people, and perhaps, finally, set them free from the chains of fear. The chamber's air was thick with dust, the scent of ancient history clinging to every breath Lyra and Ethan took. They stood in awe, the walls around them illuminated by the faint glow of their portable lights. The intricate carvings told a story far different from the dark myths that had followed the Nalvarin for centuries. "This is incredible," Ethan murmured, his fingers tracing the delicate lines of a mural depicting a Nalvarin standing beneath a sky filled with stars. They were astronomers, philosophers, and healers, not bringers of doom. Lyra's heart swelled with pride and sorrow. "It's the truth we've always known, buried under fear and ignorance." Ethan nodded, his mind racing with the implications of their discovery. "If we can show this to the galaxy, it could change everything. People need to see that your kind were once revered, not feared." Lyra's eyes shimmered in the dim light. "But how do we make them believe, after all these years of lies?" Ethan thought for a moment, then turned to her with determination. "We document everything here, every mural and carving. We gather evidence and take it back with us. And we'll need allies, people who are willing to listen and help spread the truth." They began their work, using their portable devices to capture images of the murals, each one a piece of the puzzle that would help rewrite the Nalvarin story. Hours passed as they meticulously recorded every detail, their hope growing with each discovery. As they moved deeper into the chamber, They found an ancient artifact at its center, a crystalline sphere that pulsed with a faint inner light. Lyra approached it cautiously, sensing the energy it held. She placed her hands gently on its surface, and the sphere responded, glowing brighter as if recognizing her touch. "It's a memory stone," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "It holds the knowledge of our ancestors." Ethan's eyes widened. "Then it could have everything we need to prove your people's true history." Lyra nodded, focusing her energy on the stone. Slowly, images began to form within the crystal, scenes of the Nalvarin's past, of their contributions to the galaxy, their role as guardians of peace, and the tragic betrayal that led to their downfall. The stone revealed the lies that had been spread, the fear that had been manufactured to control and isolate them. "It's all here," Lyra said, her voice trembling with emotion. "The truth, unfiltered and undeniable." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her in the moment. "We need to get this back to the station. This could change everything." As they prepared to leave, the ground trembled again, a reminder of the instability of the ancient ruins. "We need to move quickly," Ethan urged. "This place might not hold much longer." They carefully secured the memory stone, ensuring it was protected for the journey back. With their evidence in hand, they navigated their way out of the ruins, each step bringing them closer to the surface and the ship that awaited them. But as they emerged into the harsh light of the desolate planet, their hearts sank. A group of armed figures stood around their ship, their expressions hard and unforgiving. They were bounty hunters, drawn by the reward that had been placed on Lyra's kind. Well, the leader sneered, his weapon trained on them. "Looks like we found the cursed one. And a little human sympathizer, too." Ethan stepped protectively in front of Lyra, his voice steady but firm. "You don't understand what you're doing. We found proof that the Nalvarin aren't cursed. The stories are lies." The leader chuckled darkly. "Nice try, but we're not here for stories. We're here for the bounty. Hand her over, and we won't hurt you." Lyra's heart pounded, fear creeping into her thoughts. But she saw the determination in Ethan's eyes, the unyielding resolve to protect her and the truth they had uncovered. "We can't let them take this," Lyra whispered, her grip tightening on the memory stone. "It's too important." Ethan nodded subtly, his mind racing for a plan. "We won't let them," he promised. As the bounty hunters moved closer, Ethan raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, stepping slightly to the side. Okay. Just let me talk to her first." The leader hesitated, then nodded. "Make it quick." Ethan turned to Lyra, whispering urgently, "When I give the signal, run for the ship. I'll distract them." Lyra's eyes widened. "I can't leave you." "You have to," Ethan insisted. "The truth needs to get out. It's bigger than both of us." Before Lyra could protest further, Ethan shouted, "Now," and lunged at the nearest bounty hunter, knocking his weapon aside. Lyra didn't waste a second. She sprinted toward the ship, clutching the memory stone tightly, as chaos erupted behind her. The sounds of struggle and shouts filled the air, but she focused on reaching the ship, on the mission they had started together. As the ship's hatch closed behind her, Lyra activated the controls, the engines roaring to life. She looked back through the viewport, her heart aching as she saw Ethan still fighting, giving her the chance to escape. "I'll come back for you," she whispered, determination burning in her chest. "I'll make sure the galaxy knows the truth, and I'll bring you home." With a heavy heart, Lyra launched the ship into the sky, carrying the future of her people and the memory of the one who had risked everything for her, into the stars. The ship's engines hummed as Lyra navigated through the emptiness of space, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. The memory stone rested beside her, glowing faintly with the history of her people, but her thoughts were consumed by the image of Ethan, left behind on the desolate planet. She couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at her. Ethan had sacrificed himself to ensure she could escape with the truth. She had made a promise to come back for him, but for now, her priority had to be the mission they had started together. to reveal the truth about the Nalvran to the galaxy. The journey back to the station was long and filled with restless hours. Lyra reviewed the images they had captured, each one a testament to the Nalvran's true legacy. The memory stone held the key to rewriting their history, but she knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. She needed allies, people who could help amplify the truth and challenge the deep-rooted fear that had controlled the narrative for so long. As the station came into view, Lyra's heart quickened. The place that had once felt like a prison now held the potential to be a platform for change. She just needed to find the right people to help her. Once she docked, Lyra moved quickly, keeping the memory stone concealed. The station's corridors were familiar yet daunting, each step reminding her of the danger she still faced. But she couldn't let fear stop her now. She had a mission to complete, for her people and for Ethan. Lyra's first stop was the small workspace where she and Ethan had planned their journey. She hoped to find someone there who could help, someone who believed in the power of truth. To her surprise, the room wasn't empty. A group of humans and other species were gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. One of them, a human woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. "You're Lyra, aren't you? Ethan told us about you." Lyra's breath caught. "You knew Ethan?" The woman nodded. "He spoke about you and the mission you were on. He believed in what you were trying to do. We do too." Hope flickered in Lyra's heart. "Then you'll help me." "We will," the woman said firmly. "Ethan's sacrifice won't be in vain." Lyra felt a swell of gratitude. "I have something that can prove the truth about my people, but I need help to share it with the galaxy." The group listened intently as Lyra explained the memory stone and the evidence they had gathered from the ruins. When she finished, the room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Finally, another human spoke, his voice filled with resolve. "We can broadcast this. We have connections with information networks. If we can get this out, people will have to listen." Lyra nodded, her resolve strengthening. "We need to move quickly. The bounty hunters are still out there, and they won't stop until they silence me." The group sprang into action, preparing to transmit the data from the memory stone across the galaxy. Lyra worked alongside them, her focus unwavering. Every moment felt crucial, every second bringing them closer to revealing the truth. As the transmission was prepared, Lyra couldn't help but think of Ethan, wondering if he was safe, if he had managed to escape. She pushed the thoughts aside, channeling her worry into determination. She would find him once this was done. The moment came when the transmission began, the images and stories from the memory stone broadcast across countless worlds. Lyra watched as the data streamed, each frame a challenge to the lies that had imprisoned her people for generations. "Do you think they'll believe it?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with hope. "They have to," the woman replied. "Truth has a way of shining through, even in the darkest places." As the broadcast continued, the group monitored the responses. Messages began to flood in from across the galaxy, some of disbelief, others of support. The tide was beginning to turn. But Lyra knew this was just the beginning. The lies were deeply rooted, and changing minds would take time. Yet, she felt a sense of accomplishment. They had taken the first step toward freeing her people from the chains of fear and misunderstanding. "We did it," Lyra whispered, her eyes shining with tears of relief. "Ethan, we did it." The woman placed a reassuring hand on Lyra's shoulder. "Now we find him. We bring him back." Lyra nodded, her resolve firm. The truth was out there now, spreading like wildfire. But her mission wasn't complete. She had a promise to keep, and she wouldn't rest until Ethan was safe by her side. With newfound allies and the galaxy beginning to see the truth, Lyra prepared for the next part of her journey. The fight was far from over, but she wasn't alone anymore. Together, they would face whatever came next, guided by the light of truth and the memory of the one who had believed in her when no one else did. The stars shimmered through the viewport as Lyra's ship soared back to the desolate planet where she had left Ethan. The Memory Stone's broadcast had stirred the galaxy, and support for the Nalvern was growing. But Lyra's heart couldn't rest until she knew Ethan was safe. Her mind raced with thoughts of what she would find. The bounty hunters were dangerous, and the fight Ethan had engaged in to protect her still haunted her. She tightened her grip on the controls, pushing the ship to its limits. As the planet's surface came into view, Lyra's pulse quickened. The ruins, the same ancient structures where she and Ethan had discovered the truth, stood stark against the barren landscape. She landed the ship near their old spot, the engines whining as they powered down. The silence that followed was unnerving. Lyra stepped out, the memory stone tucked securely in her satchel, and scanned the horizon. The air was dry, the wind carrying the faint scent of dust and old stone. There was no sign of life, no indication of what had transpired after she had folded. "Please be alive," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. She moved cautiously, her steps echoing in the empty expanse. The ruins loomed around her, each shadow a reminder of the past, each corner holding the possibility of danger. Lyra's heart pounded as she approached the spot where the bounty hunters had confronted them. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw movement ahead. She pressed herself against a crumbling wall, peering out carefully. To her relief, it wasn't the bounty hunters. It was Ethan, battered but alive, sitting against a fallen pillar. "Ethan," Lyra called out, rushing to his side. Ethan's eyes opened, and a weary smile spread across his face. "Lyra, you came back." Tears filled her eyes as she knelt beside him. "Of course I did. I promised." He reached for her hand, squeezing it weakly. "I knew you'd keep your promise." Lyra examined his injuries. Bruises, cuts, but nothing life-threatening. "We need to get you to the ship. You need rest and medical attention." Ethan nodded slowly, allowing Lyra to help him up. As they made their way back to the ship, he leaned on her, his strength gradually returning with each step. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. Lyra smiled through her tears. "It did. The broadcast went out, and people are starting to listen. They're questioning the lies." Ethan's smile widened. "Then we did it. We started something." They reached the ship, and Lyra guided him inside, settling him into a seat before tending to his wounds. The warmth of the ship's interior was a stark contrast to the harsh world outside, offering a sense of safety they both needed. As Lyra worked, Ethan watched her with gratitude. "You're incredible, Lyra. You've done more than anyone could have imagined." She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "I couldn't have done it without you." Ethan's expression softened. "We make a good team." Once his wounds were cleaned and bandaged, Lyra set the ship on course to return to the station. "Rest now," she said gently. "We'll be home soon." Ethan nodded, exhaustion pulling him into sleep. Lyra sat beside him, watching the stars blur past, her mind filled with thoughts of what lay ahead. The galaxy had seen the truth, but the journey was far from over. There would still be challenges, resistance from those who clung to the old lies, but now they had allies, and the momentum of change was on their side. By the time they reached the station, word of their success had spread further. A small crowd awaited them, a mix of humans and other species, all eager to meet the Nalvern who had dared to challenge centuries of fear and prejudice. As they stepped off the ship, Lyra and Ethan were greeted with applause, a sound that brought tears to Lyra's eyes. She had been marked as cursed for so long, shunned and feared, but now she stood before a crowd that saw her for who she truly was, a beacon of truth and courage. The woman who had helped with the broadcast stepped forward, her eyes shining with pride. "Welcome back, Lyra. And welcome home, Ethan." Lyra smiled, her heart swelling with a sense of belonging she had never known. "Thank you. We couldn't have done this without all of you." Ethan, still leaning on Lyra for support, looked around at the faces filled with hope. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We have a long way to go, but together, We can rewrite the future." The crowd nodded, their expressions determined. The path ahead would be challenging, but they were ready to walk it together. As Lyra and Ethan stood at the heart of this newfound alliance, they felt the weight of their journey lift. They had turned the tide, and with each step forward, the galaxy would see the Nalvran not as cursed, but as a people who had risen from the ashes of lies to shine as they were always meant to. And in that moment, under the vast expanse of stars, a new dawn began, one where truth and unity could finally take root.